This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform to build your perfect website. Today I would like to share some of the worst advice that I've seen floating around the web and YouTube when it comes to outdoor, nature and landscape photography, and explain why it might be doing more harm than good, and offer a few alternatives that might help you out along the way. Now, this isn't about shaming anyone. I've believed and repeated some of these tips myself, but if you're new to photography or if you've been shooting for a while and feel a little bit stuck, this video might save you a lot of time, frustration and some missed photographs as well. So we're going to break down each piece of bad advice, talk about why it's misleading and what to consider instead. So spring has definitely sprung here in Pembrokeshire, and I've got about a 4-mile walk to do today, and I'm hopeful of capturing some landscape photos along the way as well. So let's get into the first bad piece of advice. White balance is how your camera adjusts colours so that objects look natural under different lighting conditions. Different light sources like sunlight, shade or indoor bulbs all have different colour temperatures. Some are warmer, more orange, and some are cooler, which are more blue. Auto white balance evaluates the colour temperature of the scene and tries to produce the most natural looking result possible. So my camera is always set in auto white balance, so if I need to take a shot quickly I can do, but there's quite a few scenarios where auto white balance definitely isn't the right choice. Now a panorama is a good example of this. So say I'm stitching 4 images together. As I move through the shot, if I've got auto white balance selected, each one of those frames might have a different white balance setting. Now this means if you get back to post-production and every one of your images is a different colour, it's going to be very, very difficult to stitch those images together. It's going to be a lot of sort of post-processing work to get those images to work. So in a scenario like that where I'm shooting multiple images to create a larger image, then I always set a manual white balance like daylight or shady, shoot in RAW so I can adjust the white balance to all of those images later in post-production, meaning everything is nice and consistent. Now this would be the same for focus stacking as well, or exposure blending or time blending. Really anything where you're creating a set of images that you want to keep consistency to. So yeah, in those circumstances I'd always choose a manual white balance setting. So I've come across this old chimney just here, literally in the middle of nowhere. I've no idea what it is. We have a lot of Flemish chimneys in this area, so it might be something like that, maybe an old smokehouse or something. But yeah, a really interesting little building. Not something that I'm really looking for today in terms of my landscape photography, but I have taken a shot of it because I think it might work quite well for my Between the Hills photography project. Yeah, really interesting little old building. Anyway, let's see what else we can find. So next up is to always leave your camera in autofocus because it's the best choice. Now don't get me wrong here, autofocus is fantastic and it helps us to capture a shot really fast. But for landscapes and nature photography where time isn't always a concern, taking a manual approach can actually give you more control and consistency. So I guess I take a hybrid style approach to focusing, if you will, for my landscape photography. Now what I do is I disable the half press on the shutter button and assign the AF on button to acquire focus for me. I also set the camera to full manual focus mode. Now because I've got the focus acquisition set to the AF on button, it means I can use autofocus, if you like, to focus on a specific part in my scene where I choose to place the autofocus point, and it will lock that focus in on that particular part of the scene. If I've got the camera on a tripod and I'm taking a series of images over a period of time, I know that my focus is always locked in that particular part of the scene that I chose, and I'm not accidentally moving my focus by half pressing if I had it assigned to the shutter button. Now this method does take some getting used to and it's not for everybody, but I've been using this method for many years now for my landscape work, and I've found it offers lots of consistency and it's very reliable too. So it's well worth giving it a go if you haven't already tried it. So I found a really nice pathway just here with wild garlic on the left and also some bluebells that are just starting to come into bloom on the right hand side. I think this will look absolutely amazing if there's some atmospheric conditions. Right now the light is way too harsh, so yeah, I've played around with different compositions here just trying to get something that I think might work for the future, but not today I don't think. Now, before we get on to the next terrible piece of advice you should definitely avoid, I'd just like to tell you about Squarespace, who are the sponsors of today's video. And I'd just like to say how rewarding having a website is to showcase your own photography. Now, building a website with Squarespace is super easy because they've got a huge range of awesome looking templates to choose from, plus AI tools to help you create something unique and personal in just a few clicks. I use mine to showcase my photo galleries, but there's also built-in e-commerce, so if you fancy selling prints, digital downloads or services, it's all ready to go. And should you have any questions at all, their award-winning customer service is on hand to help you out. So to set up your very own website, go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/IanWorth to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Time for some lunch. So my next piece of horrible advice that I often see is always shoot at the lowest ISO, because noisy photos are absolutely terrible. And you know, yes, noisy photos aren't great, but I would rather have a noisy photo than a blurry one. So when we increase the gain or ISO, our photo will become brighter. This gives us the opportunity to raise our shutter speed. So if you're shooting handheld, or if things are moving around in your scene and your shutter speed is quite low, you can simply increase your ISO to get a faster shutter and freeze the motion in the process. Now, I think a lot of people tend to look at ISO as a negative thing. And I know I did when I first started out. I was really scared to raise my ISO because I was terrified of getting a noisy photo. But ISO is your best friend when it comes to freezing motion, and there's countless times when we're out when we need to just bump the ISO up to get a quicker shutter speed. You know, especially when you're in woodlands like this and you've got things moving around that you want to freeze. Sometimes it can be quite difficult to get a fast enough shutter speed when you're shooting at, say, f8 or f10, something like that, when you want to get a large depth of field. So yeah, bumping the ISO up is definitely a great tool, and it's there to be used and enjoyed. I would rather see a noisy photo than a blurry one. You can always, you know, correct this in post-production. Some of the AI software that's out there now is absolutely incredible. So just as I was heading back towards the van, I passed through this amazing area of wild garlic and bluebells, which I'm really excited to shoot. And I think the light is getting more diffused now, so I'm really looking forward to this afternoon to see what else we can find and hopefully make a few images. Can't beat a cheesy pitta and a cup of Yorkshire tea. Where you can, a pasty. This area here is absolutely incredible. Just, yeah, absolutely fantastic. Definitely some shots here. We've just taken one just back there, looking up this lovely pathway here. And I think, yeah, the light's quite nice as well now. Starting to get some cloud cover. It's quite hazy as well, which is helping me to make these images here in this woodland, because earlier it was very, very contrasty. So my next piece of terrible advice that I've heard in multiple places is always fill the frame. Dead space is wasted space. Now, this is something I was told during a week-long photography workshop when I first started photography, and I can't tell you how wrong I think this piece of advice is. So filling the frame can be very good in certain situations, but I think there's a flip side to this as well. Now, if you use negative space in a very intentional way, shall we say, I think you can actually put more emphasis on your subject. So using negative space is definitely you know, something that you should consider, or at least try out if you haven't tried it before. And I think, you know, maybe having a variation works well for a lot of situations. Now, since our little lunch break back there, I've been walking for about a mile, and this has been an endless track of wild garlic, and it has completely blown my mind. You know, I spend so much time scouting and looking in woodlands for amazing places, and oftentimes I come away disappointed. This place has completely blown my mind. I'm speechless, like, it's just unreal. I don't know where to start. Wow, unreal. So the next piece of horrible advice I often see is you must use a UV filter to protect your lens. Now, I do get why this might sound like a great idea. You know, it sounds great, doesn't it? You know, a clear piece of glass that sits in front of your exposed glass element on your lens, protecting it from the wind and rain and dirt and grit. But I would suggest that if you do follow this piece of advice, that you buy the very best one that you can afford, because cheap UV filters often lack expensive coatings that prevent things like lens flare, and often the clarity of the glass will be poor as well. So having poor quality glass in front of your lens is definitely not a good idea, because after all, we've spent hundreds or thousands of pounds, haven't we, on a lens, and we want the very best possible results from it, and putting something cheap in front of it often yields bad results. So my advice would be not to go with a UV filter, but instead maybe try a lens hood if you're worried about, you know, protecting the front of your lens. A lens hood will keep the rain off the front of your element, meaning you have to wipe it less if you're out in the rain, which potentially could damage or scratch the front element of your lens. And also, if you do drop it, there's that little bit of extra reassurance. Maybe the lens hood will just bounce off and protect the front element a little bit. I must be honest, and this is probably a bit naughty, but I don't use anything on the front of my lens at the minute. I've got a polarizer on there, but when my camera is in my bag, I don't even put a lens cap on. I just put them in my bag because it's just extra faff, because I'm constantly bringing the cameras in and out of the bag every, you know, minute or two when I'm doing these videos. But that's, I guess, me being lazy and definitely not a recommendation. But yeah, I don't tend to use anything on my lenses. I just want to get the best possible quality that I can get, and you know, if things get damaged, a good insurance policy should have you covered. So this place is kind of left me speechless, to be honest. I only live about 20 minutes away from here, and I've scouted, you know, for hours and hours and hours in these woodlands around here, and just decided to take a path to the right today, and wow, unreal. Now, I'll be visiting this place a ton, I think, over the next coming years, and hopefully I'll be able to capture some really good images. It really does feel like quite a significant moment. I've been in Pembrokeshire for about 4 years now, and I've found a couple of really nice woodlands, but this one is right at the top. It's just incredible, unbelievable. Anyway, I'm set up here for a vertical shot looking down this pathway, and the dappled light's just coming through from the right hand side. I've got the polarizer on, just taking some of the sheen off the leaves. And I've got a set of 3 trees here with these vines that are wrapping around the trunks, and the patches of dappled light in the background just draw the eye through. We've got that dark to light transition again. I've bumped my ISO up to 200 just to give me 1/50th of a second, because when the wind comes through, it just moves all of the leaves around, and I just want to make sure they're nice and sharp. Anyway, let's take this image. Obviously, this has been an amazing walk, and we've covered a few things along the way, haven't we? Some, I guess, advice I've heard quite a bit on the internet that maybe isn't probably the best advice you might want to take. Now, The points I've spoke about in this video, I guess, just my own views. They're not necessarily the right way of doing things. You know, photography is all about finding your own way, experimenting and enjoying the process. But maybe these points have helped you out a little bit along the way. Anyway, I do hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to check out the one that's up there, because you might like that as well. Be sure to give it a like, because that really does help me out. And up here is my composition ebook, which you might find useful if you're looking to improve your compositional techniques. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again next week.